Today's guest is Colum Lundt. Colum is a friend, my longtime business partner, and the co-founder and CEO of our company, CoachEm. In this episode, Colum's going to talk about the monstrous gap in sales coaching that CoachEm aims to fill. Also, the difference between coaching and managing and how that ties back to both skill and will. And lastly, how CoachEm's clients are leveraging causal AI to increase quota attainment. Take a listen, but more importantly, take action. Engage on social media by providing comments. And, oh yeah, hit the subscribe button on YouTube so you're kept in the loop as new episodes are dropped each week. Welcome to Coach2Scale, how modern leaders build coaching cultures. I'm your host, Matt Benelli. Join me as we build a community of like-minded professionals who share the belief that effective coaching improves the performance of every team member. Our mission is to help leaders become better coaches. The Coach2Scale podcast is sponsored by CoachEm, the world's first AI coaching execution platform that leverages evidence-based coaching to increase quota attainment. And with that, let's get started. The results you achieve will be in direct proportion to the effort you apply. Dennis Waitley. Today's guest is someone who's taught me a lot and has consistently reminded me of the importance of focusing on the behaviors, not just the outcomes, not just the results. He's also one of those special people who writes down his goals every single year and refers back to them throughout the year. He's been a very successful entrepreneur. He was co-founder and CEO of Bridge Energy Group, which ultimately sold to Accenture. He was co-founder of Revenue Performance Group, whose clients ultimately folded into the portfolio of Sandler Training, where he became the chief revenue officer. And most recently, he's the co-founder and CEO of CoachEm, the world's first AI coaching execution platform, whose mission is to help managers and leaders become better coaches. My friend, my business partner, Colum Lundt, welcome to Coach2Scale.
Thanks for having me.
So Colum, let's start off, like softball question. You've been living and breathing this, we all have for a while now. What inspired the launch of CoachEm, and how has the vision evolved over the last year or so?
Good question. As you know, many years spent traveling the globe, coaching, consulting, training, B2B sales organizations. You start to detect a pattern. And certainly what we noticed is that the companies that invested in their managers, the managers who would pull through the training to ensure that it was applied and people were learning from each other, they saw the greatest results. And given the pandemic, where all of a sudden these managers who were the key ingredient to pull things through, are now managing everyone, or 90%, and in 90% of cases, they're managing people remotely. So they can no longer overhear things, or people can no longer overhear each other. So it had to be much more intentional. On top of that, these poor managers were facing an onslaught of trends like quiet quitting and great resignation, all those other things, the financial headwinds. So we really feel bad for those frontline managers, and you and I have been there at one point. And so we decided to do something about it.
And so, but was there a specific point where, an experience that solidified the decision where in your mind, there was, that aha moment? I mean, I know that I can look back and I don't know that there were aha moments for me, but I can look back and say, oh yeah, this and this I noticed. But was there a specific moment for you?
Looking back on, I think there was probably a point in time that became the genesis of CoachEm. And that was when we worked for a very large company based on the West Coast. They brought us out because they were struggling with conversion rates, and they had traced it back to a part of their process where they had a drop off between discovery and demo. So that conversion is where they trace back the issue. And they went further, and this was like 2018 timeframe. They said, we think we know what it is. We listened to the Gong calls, and we looked at the data from Gong, and it showed that our reps are talking 68.7% of the time. And of course, you probably remember this, but we were sort of like, what's gone? And it was fascinating to see that all these reps were talking way more than they were listening at a crucial point in the process. And so, of course, we flippantly asked, why don't you just tell them to ask more open-ended questions and to listen more on those calls? And they said, we tried that. And so that necessitated us listening to 25 to 30 call recordings. And what we realized, Matt, is the symptom was the same across the board. People talking twice as much as they're listening. But in reality, when you got down to brass tacks, listen to the calls, it was for different reasons. And I remember us bucketing these into sort of 4 different root cause issues, which each required different treatment. So if you think about that example or analogy of the, medical, you could have people all displaying common symptoms, but the underlying cause of those symptoms, someone could have strep throat, someone could have COVID, someone could have, some other viral infection. Like they all needed slightly different treatment. And that's what it dawned on us. There's absolutely no way managers in this day and age could go listen to all these calls. Even if they had time, do they know how to diagnose it? I mean, we've been doing this for years and flying all over. And even if they could diagnose, do they know the exact remedy that would help? And finally, if they could do all that, are they comfortable holding people accountable? And so that was really, looking back, the genesis for the company and the idea.
Awesome. So if you had to point your finger, what is that? What's the most important interaction, the most sacred interaction between a manager and a rep on a weekly basis?
Without a doubt, it's the one-on-one. It's the
Okay.
one-on-one meeting, and then of course the team meeting as well, right behind that.
So obviously I was leading the witness there. I knew you were going to say that. And I've often heard you say that the one-on-one is the most important meeting, and coaching is the missing ingredient when it comes to go-to-market success. But the sense is it's not happening as much as it should be. The coaching is not there. And it's not because the managers don't want to do it, because we've gone everywhere. We've talked to the leaders of all different shapes and sizes at different levels. And they all say, 90% plus say, if I could do one thing more, it would be coaching. Why isn't
Yeah.
it happening? Or is it?
No, it's definitely not happening. Salesforce State of Sales 5th edition, I believe, said 26% of all the 7,000 plus people they interviewed report they have consistent one-on-ones. So of 7,500 sales reps, 26% of them say they have one-on-ones. Quick story. I interviewed a guy one time who had moved from job to job to job. And every time he told me why he left the job, went to the other, he told me the reason why he went to that new company was because of his manager. And he would follow this leader from company to company. And I was super curious. And I asked, what was it that you found so good about this guy? And the number one thing is, he said, he coaches me. In fact, he never misses a one-on-one. And I thought about that. It hit me in the gut because I felt so guilty. I mean, the amount of times up to that point that I had blown off a one-on-one or postponed it or whatever. But if you really want to instill the right culture, you would treat that one-on-one as sacred. In fact, the easy way to think about it if you're a manager is, would I blow off an important prospect or client meeting? Would I postpone it? You would never do that. You would make sure you're there. And so the thought process is you do the same thing for your reps. So it's not happening. You're right. Everyone says they want to do it. And the number one issue we hear is the time. And I'll go one step further. When you talk to the reps now, when you go to that level, what they say is, when I do have a one-on-one, it's usually just about deals or pipeline. So they don't really feel like they're getting much out of it.
So let's take that a little further. So you're in the one-on-one, the manager's in the one-on-one with the rep, and they're not blowing it off. They're treating it like it's their biggest prospect meeting of the year, right?
Right.
So what else are they doing? What else is the manager doing if we're following that model of, treating your rep like you would treat your most important deal of the year?
It's structured. I mean, if you think about the process you would engage in for a prospect, a really important prospect or client, you'd prepare, and you would have a methodical way. Of course, we all know you've got MEDIC, you've got BANT acronym, these methodologies from Sandler to Force Management to Challenger, et cetera, Richardson. So pick your favorite methodology for selling. There really seems to be no method to the madness when it comes to one-on-one. In fact, most senior leaders, when we ask them, are your folks on one-on-one? They say, yeah. We ask, how do you know? And they can't really tell us that they know a meeting happened. And then when we push it even further, they say, well, how do they conduct it? Or they have a structured way. Most of them admit, no, they just wing it. And so when you just wing it, there's no structure to it. It becomes much more about what's going on with this deal, what's going on with that deal. Let's look at the pipeline. Because, we're all in sales. We focus on the number and you default to that.
And that leads to that stat. I think it was from Bain or McKinsey that said 75+% of sales reps wouldn't spend $1 for 1 hour of their manager's time. So I might
Yeah.
be misquoting the source, but that was the stat. That's
No,
crazy, right?
You got the source right. It was Bain Dynata. It was in Harvard Business Review. And I think it was a little bit less. It was 54%, but still a stunning indictment. If you think about 54% of these reps that they interviewed said they wouldn't invest even $1 for their manager's time. If I'm a manager and I'm reading that, I'm thinking, holy cow, these are my most important constituents. This is my job. And am I in that 46% or am I in that 54%?
Yeah, I was away a weekend or so ago with someone that I went to college with, and he's just started a few months ago at a new company. And I said, how's it going? He's like, it's going fantastic. I feel invigorated. I feel energized. And, he's our age. He's my age. He's early 50s. And I said, well, why are you energized? And he said, for the first time in almost 10 years, my manager and my manager's manager asked me what my goals are. And they also asked me what skill, like how I wanted to get better in my craft. And now here's a guy, early 50s, successful professional salesperson. And a lot of managers would look at him and say, he's got, can't teach you an old dog new tricks. He doesn't want to learn anything. I'm just going to make sure, he produces. But he's craving that. And he hasn't gotten it in 10 plus years. It's absolutely crazy.
Well, I think it's certainly for the A players, it's a desire to improve, to get to the next rung in the career ladder or in terms of your own personal growth and development. And again, we have to check our own anecdotes, right? You and I see that, but SBI did exhaustive research. I think Gallup did too, but I remember reading this, I think it was called The War for Talent. It was 2022, and they interviewed all these sales people. It may have been CS as well. And what they showed is 57% of the top performers were literally open and looking at new opportunities. So that's over half of your team. And it's funny how that kind of correlates with 54% saying they wouldn't even invest $1, right? Well, when they asked, what would get you to stay? What would keep you here in your current role? To a person, they all said something along the lines of, help me develop the skills I need to grow. Give me coaching, give me specific feedback on how I can get better. Help me get to the next rung in the career ladder. So of all these people that they interviewed, when they said, what would make you stay? It was all in that bucket that SBI called career leverage. So it's real. It's not just your friend or you or I. It's a lot of people out there who want to have that relationship with their manager where they're not just checking the box, they're actually taking the time to help them get better.
And so let's talk about coaching versus managing, because I think a lot of managers, leaders think they're coaching when in fact they're supervising or managing. Can you talk about the difference?
Sure. So I think when you think about managing, it incorporates a lot of elements to it. I think Forrester I saw something where they had 5 elements. You're a recruiter. If you're a manager, right? You got to be a recruiter. You have to coach and develop your people. You're training them. You're mentoring them. So there's different elements, but I think the issue is that when you're leading people, if you do the prep work, you help them figure out where they're struggling, and most importantly, why. If it's an issue of effort, they're just not putting in enough attempts, right? Those things that are in their control. If the behavior is too low, then you really got to manage and sort of supervise them on putting more effort forward. If the issue, however, is not effort, the issue is they're putting the effort, but they're not getting the results that they want, the outcomes, then it's about coaching to effectiveness. So I would say you want to manage the effort and coach to effectiveness. And by the way, last thing I'll say is you don't have to have all the answers. When you're coaching someone, if they're struggling, if you know someone else on the team is really good at whatever that thing is, just connect them. And there was a very interesting article, which I think became a book. I never read it, the book, but I read the article called The Connector Manager, something like that, or Manager as Connector, which means you take yourself off the hook for having all the answers, but you should be able to spot the people on your team or in your organization that are good at certain things. By the way, that's healthy in terms of the culture to give that person the limelight. And that way that rep isn't always having to listen to you drone on about something. They can kind of learn from their peers. So a long-winded answer, but that's how I look at it.
Tough to be a prophet in your own land, as they say. So can you give an example of managing effort and then coaching effectiveness?
Sure. I'll give a very easy one that I think applies broadly to sales, customer success, et cetera. So again, if you think about activities or behaviors as being in control of the person, you may look at it this way. I've got rep A and rep B. Rep A is asking for 10 referrals a week. And they get 5. And maybe they have 2 conversations out of it, right? So think about it like 10, 5, 2. Rep B is asking for 5. They're getting 4, and they're having 2 conversations. Clearly, you would want to coach rep A on effectiveness. You'd want to figure out, hey, what is rep B doing to ask for 5 and get 4 and have 2 conversations? Their conversion is unbelievable. They're super effective at referrals. So we would want rep A to do something similar to what rep B is doing.
Yeah.
You want to coach them to the effectiveness. And then the reverse, right? You want to see, hey, can we get a little bit more out of rep B? I mean, imagine if they asked just for 8. With that type of conversion rate, they might have 6 and 4 conversations. So you really want to think about, there's always this inflection point between effort and effectiveness. And where does the person struggle? Part of that is context. You need the data. But that's how we would maybe coach the first person and then manage the other person towards their effort.
Yeah. And you gave that's a great example of effort versus effectiveness, but it's often even more stark where when the manager might say something like, so, hey, Colum, when you asked, for those 10 referrals this week, how many did you get? Well, I didn't get any. Well, okay. Understand. Well, how many people did you ask for referrals? What's a common answer, Colum? Like, right.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't ask for any. Well, hey, maybe if you did, you get a better result. Go figure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, effort versus effectiveness. So the takeaway there, manage effort, coach effectiveness, skill them up. So talking about skilling them up, talking about coach them, right? We didn't start manage them. You're not the CEO of manage them. You're the CEO of CoachEm. What's the value prop of CoachEm, and what's a success story, maybe a testimonial from a client that really sheds light on how someone can benefit from leveraging the platform?
Sure. So coaching in the most purest sense of the word, if you look at some of the coaching foundations, etc., it's much more about eliciting your employee's solution, right? You're asking questions in more of a Socratic fashion so that the employee comes up with the answer. We think that's great, but we want to make sure that that discussion is pinpointed. So the value prop is we act as that sort of navigator, co-pilot, just often used phrase these days for the managers to take all the prep work and the guesswork out of it. So we grab all the data in the tech stack, we crunch it, squelch the noise and boost the signal for that manager so that when they get to the one-on-one or the team meeting for that matter, they know exactly what the issue is at this moment in time with this person, why it's happening. And then we pipe in recommendations that are proven to be the most efficacious in treating whatever that thing is. So let's just use my example earlier of the referrals. For the rep A, it would literally say, hey, there's some issues with their effectiveness here, right? We're always comparing against the top 10% in the organization. So we benchmark it, floating benchmark against the best. We're like, hey, you're struggling here in terms of your effectiveness. We may pipe in recommendations for that manager to choose from to help that rep learn over the next week. Nothing too onerous, 3 things that all are under, half an hour. So that's really the value prop is we believe that if you want to get the most out of your reps, you need to get the best out of your managers. That's kind of the slogan. So how are companies using it? What are the testimonials? Very interesting. Listen to a call from a rep. So I'll start there at the bottom. Listen to a call from a rep whose manager is delivering one-on-ones now in the platform. They use words like, so much better. I know what to work on. His game is improved, et cetera, et cetera. So they were sort of effusive in that it's now much more structured and they have something clear to work on each week. They're informed, et cetera. Managers, that term I mentioned, prep work and guesswork, that actually came from a frontline manager who said, I feel like it's just taking all the prep work and guesswork out of it. Before, it would take me, I'd reserve an hour to listen to calls, but it would take me 20 minutes just to find a call to listen to. We've sort of done all that by crunching the data from the transcripts. So, and then senior leader is starting to see a major swing in deal size. And the reason why is because they were struggling with that as an organization, but again, for many different reasons, we're able to pinpoint that. Some people, it's because they weren't sort of quantifying the pain in the early stage. Sometimes they weren't at the right level. We give that precision medicine for whatever those reps are struggling with so that eventually they'll see bigger deals in the pipeline and they'll be closing larger deals from a total contract value perspective. So again, this whole thing though is a little bit of a different approach. It's less focusing on the results, but it's getting managers to focus on the behaviors, those things upstream that will influence and impact more deals, bigger deals, faster deals.
I mean, talk about impact. How do you measure the impact of CoachEm? How do the clients measure the impact of CoachEm?
What's interesting, it's evolved a little bit for us over time, but one thing I would encourage people to think about is you've thrown a lot of tech at your reps. You've given them a lot of training. You've incented them with cool comp plans and special accelerators and so forth. There's a reason why those things are not working as well as they used to. You should still do all that. But the number one reason is we have a different structure now. We have workers coming into the workforce and have a different view on work and how they like to learn, et cetera. You have 90% of these people working remotely. There's inordinate pressure. So take that context and then think about how we want to make sure that we instrument what the managers are doing. So the managers become the leading indicator of the ultimate success. We can now tell our managers having one-on-ones or not. Of the actions they're assigning to their reps week over week, how many of them are completed? If it's a low percentage, it means that managers people are giving him or her the finger, that's the sign for the second line manager or the VP to help that manager hold people accountable. Number one thing we hear about is accountability. So now if you really think about those managers and their behaviors as a leading indicator, we can start to look at how the reps are doing when it comes to the fundamentals. And so I think, Matt, for so long, people have thought of coaching as this fluffy thing, and they really only think about deals. Those two things are synonymous. If you can get people to coach, or your managers to coach, not only during the game, but in between the games, now you really start to see real scale in the organization versus just, incremental growth.
And some people go, for lack of a better word, overboard on this. And so you and I were on a call a while back where somebody said, well, true coaching is never giving the answer. It's a Socratic method, taken to a T, right? Just
Yeah.
asking questions and getting, in this case, the rep to understand, become aware of what the path should be. That doesn't always work, though. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I also have heard a lot where people say, well, I like my reps to bring an agenda. This is their meeting. This is for them. And they're not wrong, but that assumes that the rep knows exactly where they're struggling and why. That's a false assumption. A big part of this is using the data to pinpoint exactly where someone is struggling. And you can coax that out of them, but that takes a long time. And as I heard someone say, like, you don't want someone drowning in a pool to, you don't want someone sitting on the edge, the manager saying, hey, what do you think you should do right now? Asking these Socratic questions to get them to come up with a solution because they're struggling. You want them to kind of grab them and pull them out, right? And then you can kind of coach them about how not to get in that position in the first place. But I think you're right. I think this is really a combination. When you're in those coaching moments, when you know exactly what to coach on and the person is predisposed, yes, then ask them questions so that they come to the conclusion you might already have when it comes to where to improve. But you have to use the data. You must use a structure to even get to that point in the first place.
Ton of sense. So let's pivot just a little bit. Colum, what leadership principles guide you as you build and lead the company, as you build and lead CoachEm?
That's a tough one. I think I always try to be a leader that wouldn't expect someone to do anything that I wouldn't or haven't done myself. So that's number one. I think there's a tremendous amount of knowledge on the team. So to the extent I can, I really want to harness the brain power we have. I view my role as much more about setting the vision and the mission, and then getting the right people on the bus to help us get there. In my past, I've had a lot of success really just recruiting great people. So I think about that as a super important part of the role, which a lot of managers I think do struggle with, is becoming great at recruiting and interviewing and hiring. I think hiring great people makes up for a multitude of sins and gaps as a manager. And then beyond that, making sure that we are continuing to keep our eye on the ball when it comes to not only our go-to-market strategy, but the cultural values we espouse. And how you do that is through the interview process. Make sure you're bringing people on board who embody what it is you're looking for, those traits and characteristics that are important to you and to the culture of the company, and also highlighting evidence of great behavior when it comes to those things. Any type of company meeting is super important. And then beyond that, it's just being the example and modeling whatever it is that you're hoping people will do. So there's probably a lot I'm missing. Certainly I have a long way to go, but those are some of the things I think about or I'm trying to be mindful of when it comes to leading the group.
Well, when it comes to coaching, so Coach2Scale, right? That's our podcast, and we're trying to build a community of like-minded people who care about the coaching and developing and the success of others, right? And achieving success through others. most people who have that perspective, that have that seemingly in their DNA, had good coaching modeled for them along the way.
Mm.
Who's somebody whose coaching has had a positive impact on your life and your career?
I had a leader called Fran Bates when I worked for a company called Darwin, and Fran is a gentleman. I learned a tremendous amount from him. At the time, we were doing a lot of face-to-face meetings. He even helped us think through what we'd want to wear and, and trip to these meetings. But it was a ton of great questions. He asked a ton of great questions, very disciplined. He held people accountable. So he's the first person that came to mind when you asked that question.
So, Colum, with Fran, what is something that you would always do or never do because of how you viewed Fran?
I think it was Fran. I may be misremembering, but I think it was Fran who encouraged me to treat the hiring process like I was closing $1 million deal. And if you really think about that, how often are we in a position where we're reactive? We're not building a pipeline of candidates at all times. I think a lot of managers are like, I'll do that when I have open head count, or that's too late. So treating it like you're closing $1 million deal means that you're building a pipeline, right? You would do that if you want to close $1 million deal. And then you're great at interviewing, at qualifying or disqualifying. Again, it's a parallel to the sales process. And we got to get great at it. And when you treat it that way, you feel great. Like we've hired some people recently where I was just as elated to get those folks on board as I was when I have closed big deals in the past. So, but again, using that parallel, there's a lot of prep work. You're going the extra mile to make it happen. And you're getting great you're using active listening skills, great at questioning, etc. So it's the same thing. And that's the one thing I want to make sure I mention is that when I became a manager, luckily we did have some good training at the time in my company, but I know for most, it's kind of OJT. And I think for those folks who haven't had a lot of training, take yourself off the hook from having to be a manager. Think about yourself like you did before when you were in sales, and just do everything the same. Active listen, being curious, asking great questions, qualifying and disqualifying, except now it's people. It's the employee journey, not the client journey. Just like you would handle objections, you handle excuses, same exact way. So there really is a direct parallel across both processes.
And on the topic of coaching, who's your favorite coach? What's a name a lot of people would know, fiction, nonfiction, that you say, yeah, that's one of my favorite coaches. I admire that person.
Pep Guardiola. If you think about Man City, the way he.
What's the name? I'm not.
Pep Guardiola. He's the coach of Man City. They won the treble last year. So for those of you who don't watch soccer or football, one of the most successful coaches of all time, and he is certainly an inspiration. Part of that is because he's tough when he needs to be. He gamifies a lot of his coaching. He's adamantly focused on coaching between the games. So most of us are coaching deals, right? Second half adjustment, but it's sort of late. If you realize a deal is missing, or that rep is missing key ingredients on a particular opportunity, your reaction is to try to help them do this, do that. Let me get involved, whatever the case may be. You're trying to make that deal more winnable at the latter stages. But the real question is, how can you get that rep? How can you build that rep autonomy so that they're not coming to the latter part of the pipe with missing information in the first place? How can you sort of tackle these things at the root cause? And that's where the coaching comes in. So that's why I have a ton of respect for him and how he operates a team. And he seems to be not only loved, but highly respected.
Yeah, well, gotta go look him up. Not as familiar with that name, which is great. That's why I asked the question. One of the reasons, personal benefit here. So, Colin, as we close out, AI is all the rage, right?
Mhm.
Back, in the '90s, early 2000s, anything that had .com, went through the roof, soared exponentially in stock price. These days, anything attached to AI is doing the same, i.e., Nvidia, as an example. How is CoachEm leveraging AI, and what do you think the vision? What's the vision for how AI will be used in this coaching and personal development space?
Fantastic question. I think it was actually the CEO of NVIDIA who said that everyone's running around worried about their job being replaced by AI. What they should be worrying about is their job being replaced by a person who knows how to use AI. And I think that's the way we view the world. So we were very fortunate in that day one, we found someone who'd been working in the AI ML space since 2008. So we were able to literally build a team from scratch. And the way we view the world is that the manager is the key to this whole ingredient. Is the key ingredient to this whole recipe, the manager. And so fundamentally, we do not believe people want to be coached by an AI. They just don't. And the research shows it. AI can't relate, it can't empathize, it can't hold them accountable. It's got to be a human being, the manager, that does all that with their people. But the manager needs help, like we said, given everything that's going on, the mountain of data. There's 10 tools in the stack, all spitting off tons of data. It's very, very difficult. They don't have the time in many cases, the know-how to do this. Plus, they're managing these people remotely. So our view of AI and machine learning is that it's an assistant for the manager. The AI basically helps squelch that noise, boost the signal, share those best practices, which we understand through the data are most efficacious for that manager to use. So it's really, I hate to use the word co-pilot because everyone's using that, but that is the right word. It's we act as a co-pilot for the manager. And the final thing I'll say is most of the tools you hear about, Matt, are, sales and marketing tech that are aimed outside of the organization. How do we get better intent data? How do we understand how, leads, how we can get better lead scoring, and how do we send emails, AI designed emails, and how do we use ChatGPT for this? We're using causal AI, not generative, causal AI, but focusing inward. How do we make the internal team that much better? So that's basically how we see this evolving for us. It'll never just intermediate the manager. It'll always be in support of their efforts. We think they're always going to be the key ingredient.
And in a nutshell, causal AI is?
It's cause and effect correlative AI used heavily in the medical and healthcare space. That's constantly looking at what works and what doesn't in terms of the behaviors of the team across the board. So we ingest literally a ton of data from the typical, the transcripts, CRM, sales engagement tools, dialing, email, etc. And then our causal AI goes to work on it to figure out like what are people doing to achieve those great levels of effectiveness or those great results. What is that right balance of effort and effectiveness? And where do people struggle? So it'll pop up things that are highlights, where as a manager, you get a little nudge to say, hey, give Matt a kudos on this one thing that he really improved the most since last week, because we want him to keep doing that. And then it'll spotlight where the gaps are.
Awesome. So, Colum, is there a question I should have asked you that I didn't? Basically, what I'm asking here is any parting thoughts when it comes to thinking about coaching as the missing ingredient in go-to-market success and where CoachEm helps there? Any parting thoughts?
Sure. I would say this. If you're a sales leader who's listening to this, you're under pressure. The average enterprise CRO is in the role 18 months, which is staggering. So we understand that pressure. It's all about deals, delivery on the number, etc. 10%, maybe 11%, people are true believers and truly understand the connection between coaching at the level we're talking about and hitting their numbers. They're not divorced. They're the same. Except one is focused just on deals. Let me coach to deals and quite quickly close these deals. It's very short term. And the other is more sustainable. But they're not divorced. They're synonymous. And so if you're one of these sales leaders who kind of believes in the back of your head, but does not currently have a system or a culture set up to know if your people are coaching, to know if it's impactful, and you want that type of culture and you believe in it, then we'd love to talk to you, because if you try to put that in place without a tool for your managers, without equipping and enabling them, it's not going to work. I mean, of course, they could use spreadsheets and you could mandate that they go listen to tons of calls, but if you talk to them, you'll realize they just don't have time. And so one of the things I would say, Matt, in parting, is that there's a ton of tools in the tech stack. How many of them are purpose built for managers to drive this type of coaching to effort or effectiveness? I don't see many at all. And so that's the type of folks who we want to talk to.
Great. Well, that's a good place to leave it, Colum. We covered a lot of ground in a short time here. We talked about the importance of building a purpose-built coaching culture, how coaching is a missing ingredient in go-to-market success, the role of AI, coaching effort versus effectiveness, and how to save someone when they're drowning in a pool and how to not do it. So thanks for going along on the journey today.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. And for everybody out there watching and for everybody out there listening, thanks for doing so. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you'd like to see more of. At Coach2Scale, we'd like to bring interesting guests, providing answers to questions and ideas and actionable nuggets that you can use on a daily basis. So engage, share it with a friend, hit the subscribe button, do all that stuff so that you can stay informed of all the new content that we're releasing on a weekly basis. And until next time, coach them if you want to keep them. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Coach2Scale, How Modern Leaders Build Coaching Cultures. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at coachem.io. That's CoachEm.io. And follow us on Twitter at CoachEmNow. See you all next week. Thanks for joining. And remember, coach them if you want to keep them.